When you see a crystal like this, you probably think you know exactly what it is: methamphetamine. But what if I told you that in today's market, what you're seeing is actually a high-tech illusion, a kind of chemical fraud where purity is the first thing to go? In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this deception works, unmask the chemical imposters, and show you what it means when you literally can no longer trust your own eyes.
And right away, this is the central mystery we're diving into. On one hand, you've got law enforcement like the DEA seizing these massive shipments of meth that test at record-breaking purity levels. We're talking over 96%. But then, on the other hand, drug checking services out on the street are finding that almost 20% of what's being sold as meth is either heavily cut or a completely different substance altogether. So what's the deal? Where is all that purity vanishing to between the bust and the street? To figure that out, we've got to look at how the cut has evolved. See, this isn't just about bulking up a product with cheap fillers anymore. Oh no, this is about engineering a convincing fake from the ground up.
The game has just changed so dramatically. Back in the 2000s, cuts were simple, things like Epsom salts or sugar. They were really easy to spot. Then, as the market got more sophisticated, dealers started using something called MSM to create those big, clear crystals that everyone associated with high quality. But today, we're in a whole new era, the era of the chemical mimic. We're talking about compounds so sophisticated, they are specifically designed to be indistinguishable from the real thing.
And that brings us to the absolute star of this whole deceptive show, a substance called N-isopropyl benzylamine. But most people just know it as N-iso. And believe me, it is the perfect chemical imposter. So to really get why N-iso is so darn effective, we need a super quick chemistry lesson on something called structural isomers. Okay, think of them like anagrams, right? They use the exact same letters, or in this case atoms, but they're just arranged in a different order to create a totally different word, or in this case, a totally different molecule. Now, just look at this comparison. It's insane. Neo-iso is meth's chemical doppelganger. I mean, they have the exact same weight, they look identical, forming the exact same clear shards. They even behave pretty much the same, like refusing to dissolve in acetone. This means that to the naked eye, or even to a simple lab test, they are virtually indistinguishable. It's a near-perfect disguise. And here is where it gets even crazier. N-iso doesn't just get mixed in like stirring sugar into your coffee. No. Through a process called isomorphism, its molecules actually integrate directly into the crystal structure of the methamphetamine. It becomes part of the crystal itself. This means you can't just wash it off, you can't pick it out, it's fused.
And make no mistake, N-iso is not a harmless filler. It has its own unique and deeply unpleasant set of effects, what users have dubbed the N-iso body load. We're talking headaches, confusion, and a general state of unease or dissatisfaction called dysphoria. But here's the most dangerous part. It provides none of the euphoric effects people are looking for, and that creates this terrifying feedback loop where they just take more and more to chase a high that will never, ever come, all while loading their system with this toxic imposter.
But the deception doesn't stop with N-iso because it rarely works alone. It's usually just one ingredient in a really lethal cocktail where every single chemical has its own dangerous role to play. So a typical street sample today isn't just one thing. It is a complex, chaotic mixture. You've got the actual D-methamphetamine, sure, but then you have the chemical mimics like N-iso, visual enhancers like MSM, dangerously active drugs like fentanyl and caffeine, and then just whatever leftover sludge there is from the manufacturing process. It's a total chemical mess.
Let's take MSM. It's a cheap, perfectly legal dietary supplement. Its only job in this whole scheme is to make the final product look good. It helps reform powder back into those big, impressive-looking crystals. The hidden cost? Well, when you smoke it, it turns into a powerful lung irritant, causing damage that very likely contributes to the condition that's become known as meth lung.
And then there's something even more terrifying, the goofball. That's a mix of methamphetamine and fentanyl. This combination creates a deadly, deadly trap. See, the powerful stimulant effects of the meth completely hide the sedative, breath-slowing effects of the fentanyl. So the user feels fine, maybe even energized. But hours later, as that meth starts to wear off, the hidden opioid depression takes over, and they can just stop breathing. It's a delayed action overdose, and it's absolutely brutal.
You know, you might not think caffeine is a big deal, but you would be so wrong. When you combine caffeine with meth, the two create this synergistic effect that is incredibly toxic to the heart. They basically amplify each other's stress on your cardiovascular system, which dramatically increases the risk of sudden cardiac death. So it's not just a harmless filler, it's a lethal amplifier. Okay, so faced with this level of sophisticated chemical deception, are there any reliable ways for people to know what on earth they're actually consuming? Well, the answers are complicated.
One of the few visual clues is something called the crackback. That's the pattern this substance makes when it cools down from a liquid back to a solid inside a pipe. Pure meth, it forms these really complex, feathery, almost fern-like patterns. But N-iso, with its different melting point and crystal structure, it tends to snap back into these flat, geometric lines and rectangles. A lot of users describe it as looking like a glacier or just sharp shards of glass.
Now, probably the most common purification method that people rely on is the acetone wash. The whole theory is that pure methamphetamine hydrochloride won't dissolve in anhydrous acetone, but the cutting agents will, so you can just wash them away. Simple, right?
Well, here's the catch. It absolutely will not work on N-iso. The chemists behind this whole deception chose N-iso for a very specific reason. It shares methamphetamine's insolubility in acetone. So while a wash might get rid of the MSM, it leaves the most sophisticated and, you could argue, the most dangerous mimic, N-iso, completely untouched. And that gives the user a false and really dangerous sense of purity.
And guess what? Other simple tests fail too. Those basic color-changing reagent tests, they'll still turn positive for meth even in a 50-50 mix because, well, the real meth is still in there. The bleach test is notoriously unreliable with mixtures. And as we've already seen, visual inspection is completely useless against a high-quality mimic. Basically, all the easy checks can be and are defeated.
So what does all this really mean for public health? When the entire market is flooded with what is essentially a chemical mystery box, the consequences are systemic and they are severe.
And look, this isn't just some theoretical problem. The data from drug checking services all over the world confirms the reality on the ground. A 2024 report from New Zealand found that nearly 1 in 5 samples that were brought in as methamphetamine were actually something else entirely, or a dangerous mixture. That is a massive chunk of the supply that is not what it claims to be.
The ultimate cost of all this is a multi-system attack on the human body. We're not just talking about the known risks of meth anymore. Now it's chemical lung injury from MSM, a supercharged risk of heart attack from caffeine, and compounded brain damage from N-iso, all layered on top of the constant looming threat of a fentanyl overdose. Each cut brings its own unique and devastating danger to the table. And this all brings us to a really stark conclusion. The problem we're facing today has completely evolved. It's not just about the pharmacology of a single drug anymore. It's about trying to navigate a marketplace that is built on a foundation of sophisticated, industrialized chemical fraud. So let's just quickly recap the key takeaways here. First, the purity paradox is absolutely real. Second, we've unmasked N-iso as a perfect mimic that's designed to fool common tests. Third, we've learned that active cuts like fentanyl don't just add weight, they multiply the lethality of the drug. And finally, we've seen how the purification methods people trust are completely useless against this new wave of chemical deception. And all of this leaves us with a fundamental and really challenging question. In an era where a drug's purity is an illusion and its contents are a complete mystery, our entire approach to harm reduction and public health has to change. How do you possibly protect people from a substance when you don't even really know what's in it?